To introduce our Prime Minister today, though, is one of our new members of Parliament. This gentleman fought a fine battle at the federal election and won the seat of Petrie, or for Labor member. Would you welcome to the stage to introduce our Prime Minister, Luke Howarth.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Luke Howarth, and Bruce, thank you for that introduction. I would like to acknowledge all the state executive members here today and the wonderful job they do as volunteers for our great party. The Premier, best Premier in the country. Well done, Premier. It's great to have you here. I would also just like to acknowledge, of course, my federal colleagues, and it's wonderful to have the Honourable Julie Bishop here. Julie campaigned with me so hard during the election many times. She's a wonderful person, a wonderful campaigner and a fantastic Foreign Minister. I'd also like to acknowledge all my Queensland colleagues, particularly members of Parliament, senators. As a new member, you've made me feel very welcome, and I certainly do appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the privilege, of course, of introducing our special guest today, the Prime Minister, largely because of your help as Liberal National Party members. I would like to thank you all for donating your time and effort at last year's federal election. We won the federal election last September because of your support, but also because we were and are a strong, united team, because we had a real and achievable plan to offer the Australian people. And I am both overjoyed and proud that the Australian government is now a Liberal national government. Our 28th Prime Minister is, of course, the Honourable Tony Abbott. Preparing for this speech, I asked my Year 11 work experience student this week, Larissa, who attended the conference here yesterday, I said, look, what makes a good Prime Minister? What makes a good Prime Minister? She answered, Luke, a good Prime Minister is someone who doesn't do what's popular, but what is right. And I don't think any other sentence could have better summed up Tony Abbott. The first time I spoke with Tony was just after my pre-selection, and I had the privilege of being pre-selected as the Liberal National candidate for Petrie, and I was at home relaxing, and my mobile phone rang. And my wife Louise answered the call, and she said, "Oh, it's Tony Abbott on the phone." I said, "Yeah, sure, it's Tony Abbott on the phone, you know." And she goes, "No, it's really Tony Abbott on the phone." And I took the call, and fair enough, it was the Leader of the Opposition at the time. It was Tony Abbott calling me at night to congratulate me from China, mind you, I think as well. And he said to me, "Luke, what do you do?" And I said, "Oh, well, I run a small family-owned business. I've been director of this small business, 15 staff for the last 10 years. And he said, "Okay," and pushed a bit further and said, "Oh, what type of business is it?" And I said, "Oh, it's a pest control business." And he says, "Oh, we could use your services down here, you know." And if you know Tony, he's a funny guy. He's got a great laugh, very funny man. But he also said to me, he said, "Well, Luke, you've got a good chance." And I said, "Well, look, I'll work hard. I'll work hard to win the seat and so you can become Prime Minister." And he pulled me up on that and he said, "Luke, it's not about us. It's not about you becoming the federal member for Petrie, or it's not about me becoming Prime Minister." He said, "It's about better government for all Australians." And those words stayed with me throughout the campaign, and as I approached everyone at the shops or at the pub or on the street, wherever they were, I met them with that sentiment, that it's not about me, it's about you, and that helped a lot. I met the Prime Minister again on the first week after the election in the joint party room meeting, and all my colleagues were there, and he got up and congratulated us, and I was a new member, hadn't been there much, and he said, "Look," he said, "once again, we've just come from 6 years of chaos under the Rudd-Gillard governments." He said, "We're not going to be doing jumping in front of the cameras every day. We're not going to be slave to the 24/7 news cycle. He said, well, when we have something important to say to the Australian people, we'll say it, because it's not about us. I see in Tony Abbott a man of humility and strength. It's humility that makes him real, and it's his strength, physically and mentally, that enables him to get things done. The Prime Minister has performed remarkably well overseas, but just this week here, he signed a crucial economic and military agreement with Japan, which had been sitting idle for 7 years under Labor, getting things done. And I believe that he is just the kind of Prime Minister that Australia needs right now. It's often said that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And for 6 years with the past Labor government, this was the case. Tony Abbott, on the other hand, has values. And more importantly, he knows what those values are. He believes in minimising government intervention and maximising individual initiative, freedom of thought and enterprise. He has, we know, strong family values and a supportive family to show for it. Should be celebrated. Ladies and gentlemen, it's easy to do what is popular. It's hard to do what is controversial but necessary, like getting the budget back under control. For us, it wasn't about Tony during the election campaign. It was about fighting for better government for all Australians. It's not about him now that he's Prime Minister. It's about getting the job done. But I think, if it's just for a moment, it should be about him. So I'd like, in conclusion, to say thank you to our Prime Minister. Thank you for sharing your family with us. Thank you for leading our team in Parliament. Thank you for not being able to be afraid to stand for something. And thank you, Prime Minister, for leading our nation. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute pleasure and honour to welcome to the stage, to address the membership, the Australian Prime Minister, the Honourable Tony Abbott.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Well, it might be the coldest Brisbane morning in 113 years, but that was an extremely warm welcome. Thank you so much, Luke, and thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. And you know, I was told before I came up today, don't mention the football. But you Queenslanders, you know, you can turn defeat into victory. I gather it was a points win, Campbell, on for and against. So you can declare those things when you've only got one House of Parliament to deal with. But Well, my friends, we have had an interesting week in the Senate. There are many interesting weeks in the Senate, as those who have studied politics for some time would understand. But after this last week in Canberra, the fault lines in our country, in our polity, could not be clearer. They could not be clearer. On the one hand, you have a Labor Party which insists that it got nothing wrong in 6 years of bad government, which is in denial about the election result, which is in denial about the harm the carbon tax is doing to the Australian people, which likes to talk about the light on the hill, but the light on the hill costs 10% more to run because of the Labor Party and its addiction to this carbon tax. Still thumbing its nose at the Australian public, saying you got it wrong last September. That's what you've got on one side. And on the other side, you've got a coalition which is carefully and methodically implementing the commitments that we made to the Australian people. Look at what the Labor Party is doing to this country right now. They damaged our country in government, and now they are determined to keep damaging our country in opposition. They are blocking not just the repeal of the carbon tax, not just the repeal of the mining tax. They are blocking not just our savings, they are blocking the savings that they promised the Australian people in the lead up to the last election. I heard the leader of the Labor Party in the week saying, "I just wish Tony Abbott would keep his commitments." Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. Exactly what I'm trying to do. Not only am I trying to keep the coalition's commitments, I'm trying to keep Labor's commitments too. And what they're doing, they're not just blocking our budget savings, they are blocking their own budget savings. So what's crystal clear, my friends, is that all that is keeping our country from long-term economic decline, all that is keeping our country from political gridlock is us. And I want to say congratulations and thank you to each one of you. Do not underestimate what you are doing. Do not underestimate what your representatives are doing. You and we are rescuing our country. And what is obvious is that it is only us who can rescue our country right now. Some say we've had a tough week. Well, I want to say this. I would much rather be defending a tough but necessary budget than standing before the Australian people day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out, justifying incompetence and trying to explain away dishonesty, which is what Prime Ministers Rudd and Gillard did for 6 years. And isn't it refreshing? Isn't it refreshing to have at long last in this country, in our national parliament, a government which says what it means and does what it says? A government which knows what it stands for, which knows where it wants to take the country and is not put off by a bad headline and one or two parliamentary difficulties. And you know, when you look at things in the Senate, sure, Mr Palmer has 3 senators, but Mr Shorten has 25. And we know that Mr Palmer will change his mind come Monday, but Bill Shorten will still be there come Monday, come Tuesday, come next week, come next month, come next year, supporting putting your power prices up. smiling every time your power bill increases, because that's the modern Labor Party for you. Taxes up, spending up, bigger government and smaller citizens. That's the modern Labor Party. Well, as I said, we are here to rescue this country from decline. We are here to ensure that all our tomorrows are better than all our yesterdays. That is our mission. And we said before the election, you all know it, let me repeat it for your benefit. We said before the election we'd stop the boats, we'd scrap the carbon tax, we'd build the roads of the 21st century, and we get the budget back under control, and that is exactly what we're doing. And we also said that within 12 months we would finalise free trade agreements with Korea, with Japan and with China. We've got two, and we have high hopes of getting the third. And I want to say that that free trade agreement that was signed between myself and Prime Minister Abbott this week is good news for our country. But in particular, it's good news for Queensland. It will secure the future of the great mining industry of Queensland. It will help the future of the great agricultural industries of Queensland. It will ensure that the people of Queensland get access over time to even better and more reliable consumer goods. That's what free trade is all about. Free trade is about more jobs and lower prices, and that is what we want to deliver to the people of Queensland and the people of Australia. I said that we would stop the boats, and I am not declaring victory, but my friends, we are stopping those boats. The most compassionate thing we could do coming into government was to stop the boats, because not only does stopping the boats stop the budget blowouts, not only does stopping the boats save billions in unnecessary future spending, but stopping the boats stops the deaths. That's why the most decent and the most compassionate thing that this government has done is to ensure that for more than 6 months now there has been no successful people smuggling venture to our country. And we will never waver. We will never waver in our determination to stop the boats. We will never waver in our commitment to do what we have to do to stop the boats, because we must have secure borders. The sign of a sovereign country is that it has secure borders. And while we are stopping the boats, what's the Labor Party doing? Well, the Labor Party, as we know, can never stop the boats because it is an alliance with the Greens, and as far as the Greens are concerned, if you can get here, you can stay here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the problem. You just cannot trust the Labor Party with border security. And we are building the roads. And here in Queensland, along with your great Premier, Campbell Newman, we are getting on with the Gateway motorway upgrade. We will build the Toowoomba Range crossing starting next year. We are continuing the upgrade of the Bruce Highway. And only a coalition government in Canberra will work with a coalition government in Brisbane to move the people and the goods of Queensland around this great state. You can't trust Labor to build roads because, again, they're in alliance with the Greens. And the Greens and Labor suffer from what I call the banana syndrome. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. That's what they suffer from. They are the obstacles to progress. They are the enemies of progress. And if you want to build the roads of the future, you have one friend, and that's the coalition here in Brisbane and in Canberra. And we are scrapping the carbon tax. And if we have a problem in one day in the Parliament, we will work, we will regroup, and we will deal with it the next day, because that's what sensible adult governments do. If we have a problem, we don't despair, we deal with it. And that's exactly what this government is doing. But I do give you this assurance: we won't rest until the carbon tax is gone, because this is a toxic tax. It's adding 9% to your power bills. It's a $9 billion handbrake on our economy, and it's costing the average Australian families $550 a year. So it must go. And my friends, we are getting the budget under control. And didn't we need to get the budget under control? The former government, the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government, gave us the 6 biggest deficits in our history. But they didn't just give us the 6 biggest deficits in our history, they stored up debt and deficit as far as the eye can see. $123 billion in projected future deficits. Debt after a decade peaking at $667 billion. $25,000 per Australian man, woman and child. $1 billion a month right now. The interest bill on Labor's debt, that's dead money that can't be spent on schools and hospitals and roads because of the debt that Labor ran up. And our mission is to fix this. Our mission is to fix this because we know, you know, the Australian people know in the marrow of their bones that governments aren't so different from families and households. Governments have got to live within their means. And that's exactly what happens as a result of this budget. Within 4 years, we get back to balance. After all the years of debt and deficit, after all the debt and deficit disaster of the Labor Party, and thanks to this budget, peak debt comes in $300 billion lower than it would under the policies of our opponents. And I know there are many tough elements in this budget, but the Australian people want to be told the truth. The Australian people are reasonable, decent, stoical people. Australians have faced tough times before, and they know that sometimes you have to make tough decisions today to make tomorrow better. We are deregulating our universities because we know that if there's one institution in the modern world which ought to be capable of running itself, which ought not need to have its hand held by government, it's our universities, particularly the great universities here in Queensland. We do have a strong but necessary message to the young people of Australia. When you leave school, you will be earning or learning, because no one should start their adult life on social security. And yes, we do want to see a modest co-payment for Medicare services, not because we want to make life difficult for people, but because we want our great Medicare system, our great health system, to be sustainable for the long term. And I congratulate Peter Dutton for the work he's doing as Health Minister, and I congratulate you in this conference for the tough and fair-minded approach that you have taken to this difficult subject. But I say this to the people of Australia: if it's right and fair and reasonable to have a modest co-payment for PBS drugs, how can it not be right and fair and reasonable to have a modest co-payment for Medicare, especially when it is necessary to keep the system sustainable for the long term? And yes, we are changing the indexation system for most social security benefits, again, to make a generous social security system sustainable. because our country is changing. Demography is destiny, as Peter Costello said a few years ago. And right now, there are 5 workers in our economy for every pensioner. If things don't change, in 40 years' time, there'll be just 3 workers for every pensioner. So we do need to make changes now to ensure that the system is sustainable for the long term. And some of the changes I announced just this week. We are determined to ensure that just as our young people are encouraged to move swiftly into the workforce, older Australians who want to work should be encouraged to work. You see, I know there aren't very many older people in this audience, and all of you are working, not necessarily for pay, but you are working for our country in being here today. But the truth is that we do want to change the economics of employing older people. We do want to break through the prejudice against older workers, which has bedevilled our economy for too long. That's why already, thanks to this government's budget, if you take an older worker on and keep that worker employed for 2 years, there's a $10,000 payment that's available to you and your business. Because what we're doing with this budget is not just saving, but we're building too. We are embarked on the biggest infrastructure spend in the Commonwealth's history. $50 billion of new infrastructure spending as a result of this budget. And we're not just living within our means, but we're playing to our strengths as well. A $20 billion medical research future fund as a result of this budget to ensure that Australia will continue to lead the world when it comes to devising the treatments and the cures of the future. So this is the right budget for our country. And yes, it has to be negotiated through the Senate, as every government has had to negotiate its budget through the Senate. But I say to the critics, what is your alternative? What is your alternative? Because if you have no ideas of your own, stop wrecking and let those who have the ideas get on with the job of building a better Australia. Luke, thank you so much for your warm introduction. Thank you so much for remembering some of the things that I've said privately and publicly over the last 4 years. Because if there is a lesson from the period of the former government, governing is not about the government, it is about the people. Good government is not about us, it is about you. That's the lesson that we need to learn. Our job is to make life easier for you, the people of Australia, and to do so in a way which is consistent with our values and which reflects your values. We are building, this government is building, a stronger Australia with smaller government, with more choice and bigger citizens. We know the stronger Australia that we seek, an Australia with secure borders, an Australia that lives within its means, an Australia that finds strength in our differences and unity in our diversity, an Australia where each generation can leave to its children a better life, and an Australia which is a beacon of hope and optimism to people all around the world. That is the Australia that we are building. But we don't do it alone. I am blessed with some extraordinary colleagues. We are blessed with a great party. I want to thank you, Bruce, and I want to thank Brad Henderson and the State Executive and all the members of the Queensland LNP for the support that you have given to my colleagues and me so consistently over the last 4 years. I pay tribute to all of my parliamentary colleagues, in particular the Deputy Prime Minister, Warren Truss, who was here earlier, to Julie Bishop, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party and the Foreign Minister, my indispensable right hand in government. I should particularly acknowledge my newest parliamentary colleagues, James McGrath and Matt Canavan. Welcome to the Senate. You've got a big job, and I know you'll do it well. But this is a critical time for our country. All times matter, but this time matters more than most. Our mission, our destiny, is to demonstrate to the Australian people that the last 6 years of division and dysfunction are not the new normal. Our mission, our destiny, is to demonstrate to the Australian people that we are the same strength today that we are of old, and that we can do even better things today than we have in the past. My colleagues and I are determined to repay the trust that you placed in us last September. We are honouring our commitments. We are working for our country's long-term betterment. We are doing what's right for our country and what's right for our children. We're doing it for you. So, my friends, thank you so much. As always, a tremendous honour to be here in Queensland. As always, a tremendous honour to bask in the support and friendship of my Queensland colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And to move a vote of thanks to our Prime Minister, I'd like to invite to the lectern. We had a House of Representatives person before, and I thought it was only appropriate we have someone from the Senate, Senator Brett Mason. Welcome, Brett.
Bruce, thank you so very much. Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen. Prime Minister, perhaps I should commence with an apology. I nearly missed your stirring address this morning because I was out having brunch with Clive Palmer. We've had a very tough week in the Senate, and I thought I'd enter into negotiations myself. It didn't go all that well. Clive ate his brunch, and then he ate mine. And then halfway through, he stormed out and left me with the bill. But I'm hoping for a better week next week. Prime Minister, you have often said, I've heard you say this throughout our great country, that the very fact of being an Australian means you have won the lottery of life. Well, of course, Prime Minister, we Queenslanders believe that we've won first prize in that lottery. And Prime Minister, even though this week we've been very tough on blokes from New South Wales supporting the Blues, we make a very warm exception for you. But Prime Minister, you have always been well supported in Queensland, particularly here in the LNP, particularly by the men and women in this room, it is not an exaggeration to say that perhaps more than many others, they were responsible for you becoming Leader of the Opposition and gave you the chance to become Prime Minister. But Prime Minister, I want to thank you for what you have done for us. In 2009, when you became Leader of the Opposition, let's face it, we were at a pretty low ebb. Politics was pretty tough. But with your conviction, your commitment, and indeed your courage, you pulled us together, and within 9 months you nearly pulled off a miraculous victory. It was a stunning performance, and you are the greatest opposition leader. You became the greatest opposition leader our party has ever known. Everyone here, every member of the LNP, now of course urges you, Prime Minister, to bring forward that same conviction, that same commitment and that same courage for our cause to become our greatest Prime Minister. That is what now beckons. Prime Minister, I thank you so much for being with us today. It is wonderful to see you. And could everyone please join me in thanking Tony Abbott, our Prime Minister.